Hello and welcome to Video Revealed. I'm Colin Smith. Let's have a look at everything you can do in the Program Monitor menu. There's a lot there that's really important. All right, inside the Program Monitor in the wrench menu, there are many things. Some of them are also in the button bar, which I'll show you. Some of them are in other menus and other places. You don't use all of them. Like the VR part, you would only use if you're doing VR. But there are some things in there you might not know that you can turn on, and some things you shouldn't turn on that we're going to cover. Let's have a look. So in the Program Monitor, and I'm in the Essentials, I've changed my workspace a little bit and call it Home Base, but I basically have the Program Monitor in the middle. And really what I'm talking about is this Settings menu right here. From top to bottom, we're going to go through everything. The first one is Gang, Source, and Program. Now the source is behind the program, so it makes no sense. To show this one, I will go to my workspaces and choose Editing. That way I have the source monitor showing at the same time, because the whole idea is you're ganging one to the other. So if I open up, let's open up this clip right here. And if I enable this, by the way, in the button editor, this plus button here shows you all of the things you can add to the bottom. You can remove things too if you want, but the gang button is right here. I'm not going to add any of these. I just want to show you where they are. So back in here, Gang, Source, and Program. Now when I move this around, you'll see that they both play together. If I hit play, they don't play. As soon as I hit stop, you'll see it will launch. If I go past that clip, you're not going to see it. That clip is longer than this, so I get to see before the clip and after the clip. And you can also put the whole, I could put the whole sequence in here if I wanted to, and then I could gang the source. Oh, I've actually left it in here on this one. But you could put the source and put the whole sequence in here if you want. So that's the first one. That's Gang, Source, and Program Monitor. And I'll turn that off and go back to my home base setting. Okay, next up is composite video, which is what you're looking here. It's a combination of all of the different channels. This is a recent addition to Premiere Pro, the ability to look at just specific channels. And you can do something like this in Photoshop and After Effects. There is no alpha channel, so everything's white. If there was, you would see it. This is very useful if you want to quickly check to see if you do have an alpha channel and maybe it's not showing for whatever reason. So you can turn that on. You can also look at the individual channels, red, green, and blue. So I'll choose green. That's just the green channel. This is exactly like looking at channels in Photoshop. Sometimes you can use this to help understand what's going on in the color. Okay, let's go back to composite view. Next up is multi-camera, and I'll go to a multicam that I built really quick here to show you. And multicam is also in the buttons. So if I click on my buttons right there, this is a good one to have that you can toggle on and off, and you can see the keyboard shortcut for multi-camera view. So let's go back, turn on multi-camera. Now I've got 4. In this one I have 4, but you can have as many as you want, different angles of the camera and the main output. I'm going to go back and turn that off. Go back and turn off multi-camera view. The next one is comparison view. Really powerful. And this is already on the button on the bottom here. So for instance, if I wanted to change, it's really good for color, but you can use this for anything. So if I turn this on, I get to see a comparison of 2 different parts of the timeline. Or I can use this to look at, let me turn this off first, and I want to use this to look at different parts of the frame itself. So let me select this clip, first, select the clip, turn it on, go to Lumetri, and warm this up. And you can see I'm looking at a comparison view, side by side, or top to bottom, or left to right if I'm looking at the individual frame. You can also use this down in the colors and wheels. You can use this as a comparison view. You can turn this on here, and you can match color and do face detection. I've got a whole tutorial on how to do this. This is useful if you're trying to match the color between two different clips. All right, so let's get rid of that and turn this back off. Okay, so now that was the comparison view. Next up is VR video, and I've got a stitched video here. You can't really see what's going on because it's stitched and it's not turned on. So when I enable this, now when I hit play, I'm playing this back and I can see this in VR. Let me turn that off. Premiere Pro completely works with a heads-up display with VR goggles, so you can actually put goggles on and edit in Premiere Pro and look at the controls. I don't know how useful that is, but you can do it. All right, next up. Oh yeah, and VR is also in here, right there, so you can put that on the bottom. Along with VR is ambisonics, where you can monitor ambisonics. I don't have an example of that, but you could. I don't have an example of interlaced, but here you can display first, second, or both fields. Interlaced, no one's using that today. Maybe old broadcast, some people are using this in broadcast, but this way you can look at the interlaced fields and choose which field to look at. Playback resolution. Here you can change the playback resolution. Maybe if you're working with something like 4K or 6K, you can turn this down. Right now you'll see full right over here and full here. If I turn this to a quarter, it changes here. So they're both connected. Playback is connected to that drop-down menu. Pause resolution is full. This makes sense just to leave it on. Anytime you hit pause, you'll be able to see the full screen resolution. Remember I said there are some things you shouldn't touch? That's this thing here. High quality playback. You don't need this. The only time you will see this is with graphics. When you play some graphics, you might see the quality not as crisp as you want. Warning, if you do turn this on and leave it on all the time, it takes a lot of performance to leave this on. So that's why Adobe doesn't turn it on by default. I only ever turn this on if I want to check graphics. I never turn it on for video. If I want to check graphics, a title and the clarity, I'll turn that on, but I'll leave that off otherwise. Next one up is timecode overlay during edit. So if I trim these clips here, and as I move the clip, you'll see I get the timecode. If I turn timecode overlay off, now when I edit, I'm still editing, but I don't see the actual source timecode for those clips. Okay, enable transmit. I wish this was a button down in here. I actually have mine enabled on a keyboard shortcut, but it makes no sense for me to turn on transmit. Transmit is when you have more than one display and you want to play back the screen, full screen. I use this all the time. I edit my whole show on actually 3 screens, and I have one full screen, one is Premiere Pro, and another one is my scopes. Over in the Lumetri color settings, preferences, here's where you can turn on and off which displays you're using for transmit playback. I only have my one laptop display, but if I had a second one connected, I would use this. So if you've got an extra display, if you've got an old television that you want a flat screen that you want to stick on go nuts. As long as your computer can send out to another display, you're good to go. Okay. Next up is loop. So if I wanted to loop this section here, let's see, I'll hit the I key, down, 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 out key. I want to loop around this area here. I've got a whole bunch of quick shots that I'd like to loop. You can turn loop on. Turn on loop. Now it's going to loop between that in and out point. If I change the in and out point, it's now going to loop after I stop. So it won't continue to loop in that different spot. Now, in preparing this, I found something out that drove me nuts all the time. I thought Control L on Windows, Command L on Mac always turned loop on. It does and it doesn't. It does for some things, but it doesn't for the timeline playback. It would always drive me nuts when I would try to hit the keyboard shortcut and it wouldn't loop. Here's why. I'm going to go to my Edit menu on Windows, the Premiere Pro menu on Mac, keyboard shortcuts, type in loop, and look what happens. Oh, there's loop. That's in the Audio Track Mixer panel menu. Oh, there's loop. That's in the Effects Control panel menu. Oh, and here's the Metadata panel, loop. What? I just want a loop. Application, loop playback. So I could add it in here and then it would loop. I just thought it was on all the time. Okay. And loop is also in the button editor. So that's loop. Very, very powerful, very useful. Show the transport controls. If you don't want these controls down here, turn them off. It gives you a little bit more room, but I think it's useful to have those controls. Next up, show scroll bars. When I turn this on, I can scroll back and forth, up and down, past the size of the frame. If you have a multi-button mouse, this is just a cheap $9 mouse that has a button in the middle, a third button. You can actually pan around in here and you don't need those. So if I'm zooming in, you can see I can change the zoom value here, zoom in, and I can pan around to check part of my frame and zoom back out. So that's an old setting, scroll bars. You don't need that if you don't, if you have a 3-button mouse. Next up, show audio time units. This is also in the little flyout menu here. Show audio time units. Show audio time units. Right now, when you're moving on your timeline, left and right arrow, you're moving one frame at a time. But if you want more accuracy, if you want a sample level accuracy, that's like thousands of little samples in the audio, you have to turn that on. And you can turn that on there. Now I could zoom in, and if you look at the audio units, I'm down to a sample level here. And I'm moving, see the picture doesn't change, I'm moving at a sub level. And I could turn that back off. And you see it jumps out at that point. Why not leave it on all the time? Go ahead if you want to, but if you want the accuracy of editing per frame, that's going to cause you problems. So I leave it off. And only turn it on when I need it. Okay. Show markers. Now, if I added a sequence marker in here, so I'll tap the M key, you'll see it shows up in here. It also makes this display a little bit smaller. If I want, I can turn these markers off, and I leave the markers down here. So I'm just going to clear my markers and leave that on. Okay. Next one, show dropped frame indicator. That's this thing here, and when you mouse over, it shows if you're dropping frames or not. And you can see I haven't dropped any frames as I'm playing this back. Everything's playing back in real time. But this is useful in performance if you want to check that what you're looking at is frame accurate. Maybe you have to lower the resolution or change your disk access. This is usually the speed of the disk playing this stuff back has a lot to do with it. Also the CPU and the RAM, if you're pushing a computer that has lower power, you can turn that on to check. Time ruler numbers. You can see the numbers down here and no numbers there, but you can turn them on up here. Safe margins. Turn safe margins on. Here we got action and title safe margins. If you want to find out where those are set, back in the wrench at the bottom, overlay settings, settings. We'll get to that in a second. So you can turn these on and off, safe margins. And safe margins is also in the button editor. Here's one I use occasionally, transparency grid. And you'll see as I fade out, it goes to transparent. So this is very much like a Photoshop or After Effects transparency grid. If I go to my opacity and cut a mask, then you can see that the mask, beyond the mask, is transparent. And to me, this is really useful if, again, I want to check, did the alpha channel make it to the clip that I'm looking at? And maybe it didn't, and I can't see that transparency background, or I just want to check that what I think is transparent. So if you turn that transparency grid off, I can see the mask, but it goes to black. I turn that, delete that mask, I don't need that. Okay. This one's useful, global FX mute, and it's also in here, right there, global FX mute. And I'm not going to see any change here. This is really useful if you quickly want to turn all the effects off for your timeline. Maybe it's a performance thing where you're working on the edit and the effects aren't as important right now, but they might be slowing down your system. Global effects mute and then edit and then turn them back on. Make sure that you turn them back on. Or you're trying to see something and the effect itself, blurring or whatever, is making that hard. Instead of turning the effect off, you have to click effects off. There's a global effects off. That's really useful. Okay. Show rulers and show guides. We'll put these two together. There are also buttons for these two. This is really useful for working with graphics and lining things up. So if we go to View, Show Rulers. There's our rulers there. And Show Guides. Here you can drag guides out from the side. And you can also right-click in there and add a guide. So I use this if I'm trying to create a specific frame size or an alignment. If I'm trying to align a bunch of things, I can make sure guides are there and you can snap to those guides, which we'll get to in a second. You can get rid of a guide just by dragging it off. And we'll turn those off, guides. And they both have keyboard shortcuts. Same keyboard shortcuts you would use in Photoshop and other applications. All right, next is Snap in Program Monitor, which I have already turned on. And it's right there, Snap in Program Monitor. And this is useful if you're trying to align multiple frames, maybe picture-in-picture kinds of things. But you can also use it for aligning stuff here. So I'm starting to drag this down. Now I know I'm exactly in the center and I've locked to that particular graphic right there. All right, now the next ones are the multicam. I'm not really going to go too deep into this, but I will show you. This is where, if I click on my multicam, I go to my multicam view, and we have to turn on multicam view. Now we get many of these commands. Multi-camera audio follows video, multi-camera selection top-down, multi-camera preview monitors. So that one's turned on by default to show us that preview. Auto adjust multicam playback quality, so it's going to lower the quality to playback better, and transmit multi-camera view. Right now when you're sending this out to transmit, you only get the main view, but if you want all of the angles, you could turn that on, and then you can use this to edit the different camera angles that you have. So now let's get to the overlays. If you just select overlays, it turns on whatever overlays are selected, and you can see in this one it gives you the time code of video and audio tracks. If you go a little further, overlay, if we go to edit overlay, it gives us V1 overlay. If we go to our overlay settings, in here you can create your own settings. So this one is showing source time code, all tracks, vertical alignment. This can show the same thing, markers, sequence, lots of different control, and you can save these, you can load them, you can save presets and import presets, multi-camera sources. You can include a 4:3 safe margin, so if you're working with HD, you can also see 4:3. There's your title and action safe areas. You can enable overlays if you're going out to transmit, enable during playback. You can look at end of sequence indicators, so you get to see these things here that show up that drive some people crazy, but if you want them, they're there. And we turn overlays off, everything disappears. So that's everything inside the program monitor menu. I think it's really useful to know those things because, as I showed you, they're pointing to different directions and they have different features depending on which one you're using. And if you don't know that you've got all of those things like snapping and looping and overlays, you might be missing those kinds of features. So hopefully that gives you an indication of some places that you might want to poke around inside the interface. Hey, if you're new to Video Revealed and you found this informative, take a moment and subscribe. You want to support us some more, you can do that on VideoRevealed.com/shop. Donate once monthly, any amount. Thanks to all of our wonderful donors. And if you go there, you can download a whole bunch of free stuff. Till next time, I'm Colin Smith, and it's my job to take something like the program monitor and break it down so you get to see everything that is available for you.